Network. This is Colonel Mike sitting in for John, who's down in Myrtle Beach with the fur line, and JoJo with baseball. And you know, when we have that traveling music on, it's our guest coming up, Aaron Renn. Good morning, Aaron Renn. Welcome to the show with Colonel Mike.
Thanks for having me on, and fantastic music choices as always.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You hear that, Kiara? Fantastic music. She's looking at me. Why did you give me so much music today, Colonel Mike? Oh, I'm busy. Anyway, it's been a while. You know, I don't know if you heard it, if you were listening before. I'm going to change my name to Vivaldi. The Four Seasons. I come on every season now. I used to be on a lot more often. So John has me on when he's taking a break here and there and everywhere. But, Aaron, you haven't been on since the winter, December last year. And you've written a lot, and I looked at the last one I looked at was Philly, but you know you could pick the last two or three, pick something. I think Philly's interesting. Let's talk about when we're with Aaron Renn, who's with the City Journal Manhattan Institute. We always get to find out what's going on around the country, especially over in flyover country. But now he's got to Philly, and he's got some new news. Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, Philadelphia is an interesting case of a very large, historically significant city in America, first capital or second capital of the country, and very influential in American history, but it had fallen on extreme hard times because of deindustrialization. I mean, it was a big industrial city, like many, and it was a city that was losing population, that was extremely gritty. And as places like Boston and Washington and New York really came back from their declines and became these extremely hyper elite cities in many ways, Philadelphia had really struggled to reinvent itself. But what we're seeing now is that Philadelphia is starting to show the same signs of a comeback that some of those other cities are, notably that the population in the city is starting to grow again, which is a big accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. Some great writers of the music day, I think it was not Motown, post-Motown. It was the Philly sound in those days. I think it was Lamont Dozier. I'm going to look it up right now. But some of the great writers of the 70s disco generation kind of music came out of Philly, too.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like Philadelphia a lot as a city. You know, I'm a Midwest guy, and so I'm used to industrial cities, you know, places that have a little more of a blue-collar ethos to them, maybe a little grittier. And so I've always just enjoyed visiting Philadelphia. It's got really unique architecture with its row houses, and you feel like you're in a real city, you know, when you're in Philadelphia, and I've always liked that about it.
What is their communities? What's the hot communities? Do they have like the Williamsburg or Crown? What cities are popping or areas?
Well, I mean, the Center City area, which is their downtown, is definitely, the areas all around that are doing very well. And then you're even starting to see, I would hesitate to call it gentrification, but interest and people buying in neighborhoods, even like Kensington, which is you would be almost like stereotyped as a really, really rough neighborhood there. But I have a friend personally who bought in that neighborhood. And so some of the old neighborhoods are seeing, you know, investors come in, and, you know, it'll be interesting to see, you know, what happens. There's always a lot of concern about gentrification. I'm not seeing a lot of displacement of people in Philadelphia, but right now, essentially the areas adjacent to Center City are doing pretty well. You know, Philadelphia has the big advantage that very few cities have, and that it still has a very strong transit network, including a big commuter rail network and elevated rail coming into its downtown. So there's a lot going on in its greater downtown area. You know, the University City area where Penn and some of the institutions are located. Having an Ivy League school counts for a lot, particularly one that's sort of changed its tune around trying to separate itself from the city, now wants to engage with the city. So there's a lot going on there. It's kind of a very good hospital network, a very renowned children's hospital there. So there's a lot of great institutions in Philadelphia. Great museums. The art museum is great. The Barnes collection, which is now there, is fantastic. There's a lot in Philadelphia.
Back in the day, you had singers and like Teddy Pendergrass, Patti LaBelle, Philadelphia, the great jazz Phyllis Hyman, who died way too young. She was a friend of mine. I think Erykah Badu came out of Philadelphia too. But there was a group called Lamont Dozier Lamont or Dozier Lamont. It was like two of the same family name, and they had major hits back in the '70s when Teddy Pendergrass, and it was called Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes back then. Philly was was the city of brotherly love, and it was the soul sound. And I think, if I'm correct, Aaron, I think Dick Clark started out in Philly. I think Dick Clark started out in Philly.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but you could definitely, what you're basically rattling off is that Philadelphia is a major city that had a lot of robust culture to it.
Yes,
it wasn't just essentially a branch plant city that was there, a very middle America type cities like, maybe some in the Midwest where I'm from. This was a place that was an important American city and that has always had interesting people doing interesting things in it.
Back in the day,
it's almost a matter of, for a city like Philadelphia, the question is almost not why did they come back, but why didn't they start coming back sooner?
Sooner, yes. Back in the day, it was like the second television city to New York. I'm thinking '60s, late '50s, early '60s. They had studio operations down there, and if I'm correct, I think Comcast is headquartered there now. They had a banking community. They had a big banking community there, and there's it was close to New York by rail.
Work in the area as well.
So you see some gentrification. Did you go to the old Italian area? They used to have some good restaurants down there. Little Italy area.
I've been more focused on things like their cheesesteaks.
Oh, they do have. That's the capital, right? That is it. Everybody tries to imitate them. You know what I mean? No matter how, there's two I remember at the end portion of Little Italy, there was two competitors diagonally of Philly cheesesteaks. It was like the war of cheesesteaks, Philly cheesesteaks,
it's there's just so much there. I mean, it's a huge city. It's like close to 1.5 million people just in the city, and the region has 6 million people. So it is a gigantic city, one of the 10 largest in the United States in terms of the region. And so there's a lot to explore. I mean, you could go back again and again and explore a place like that because there's just so much. I mean, I don't pretend to even be close to being the experts on all things Philadelphia, but I really enjoy going down there.
It's not far by train from New York City, correct?
No, it's about 90 minutes on the Amtrak. Maybe the Acela is a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually make a day trip from New York, go down in the morning, come back from the evening. I've actually gone down to Philadelphia just to attend an event in the evening and come back the same day. It's pretty easy to do. Things are connected here.
So you see that as the next or soon to be kind of gentrified or hipster, and the hipsters, they move. You know how they are. Whether it's technology or whatever. But that's good news. In other words, it's a city that went down and it's on an upswing, and we'd like to see more of these cities happening. What else would you like to mention before the Philadelphia article? You had another good one in there.
Well, what I think is interesting and hot off the presses is the Census Bureau every year releases population estimates for the country, and they just released new estimates today. New York City has actually lost population last year, even though Philadelphia gained it, which I think is very interesting. And one of the things that I see, and I think gets at some of these economic issues that you probably talk about a lot in the divides in our country, there are 381 metropolitan areas, urban regions in the country. 94 of them shrank last year.
Wow.
So it's not just the central city going down, but the whole region is actually shrinking. And that's about twice as many regions shrinking as were shrinking 10 years ago.
That's 30%.
So we're seeing a tremendous expansion of the number of places that are experiencing population loss. And that's not a very good sign for them, and probably not a very good sign for our country when a quarter of our cities are in decline.
What do you see any of these local or state or regional group governments getting together with any ideas? Are there any brainstorming to prevent some of this?
Well, I think it's really challenging because A lot of these cities were created during the industrial era. And if you think about it, we went as a country from a farming society and agricultural society to an industrial society. And when that happened, people relocated from rural areas to urban areas. Now, there's still rural towns and there's still rural areas. They're not all dead. But, we used to be a majority, almost entirely rural nation. And today, we're over 80% urban, if you count essentially urban and suburban. Well, what's happened is the economy is now increasingly post-industrial. It's more based on services. It's more based on knowledge industries like high-tech or biotech or advanced manufacturing. And these are much more dependent on, people with a lot of training and degrees and education. And they have really favored, they favored different kind of places. So they favored larger cities, and they favored different kind of cities. So as the economy has changed, we're really seeing people resort themselves a bit to align with the new economy. So in a place like Ohio, what you're seeing is a lot of the people are going to Columbus, the big successful city with the state university. In Indiana, they're going to Indianapolis, but a lot of the smaller cities in these places are shrinking. And so, I don't know that there's necessarily any easy way to stop it because it's being driven, at least in part by changes in the economy. Just one example, today you're much more likely to have a dual career couple where, both spouses have college degrees and have their own careers. Well, in order to support two careers, you need to have a bigger city. So just something like the entry of women into the workforce and dual career families, tends to favor larger cities. So there's a lot of factors that are essentially undermining some of these smaller post-industrial cities that we heard a lot about during the election, and it's not easy for them.
How long do you stay in a place when you do something like this research you did for Philly? How long do you stay there?
Well, with Philadelphia, I just drew on my previous visits to the city because I've been there so many times. But ordinarily, if I'm going to write a major feature article on a city, this was a short piece about Philadelphia. Really, it was a commentary on their a report that the Pew Charitable Trust put out, actually. But usually, I will take 2 to 3 days. I like to visit a place and spend a lot of time driving around. Spend a lot of time talking to people. There's a lot of research you can do remotely in terms of looking at data and talking to people on the phone, but there's really no substitute for just going and I always say you can tell a lot about a place just by looking around. And I like to get a car, drive all over, not just the city, but go out into the suburbs, take a look around at the style of buildings, talk to people, and just really try to get a sense of the place by visiting it and understanding how people conceptualize and think about their own city. But I'll often spend 2 or 3 days in a place, just trying to get the feel of it. And then a lot of the places that I write about are places that I've been to, multiple times. I keep going back to them and kind of follow them over time.
Well, I read another piece just last week about Nashville, and I sent it to you. I hope you got it. Somebody else followed up with a Nashville piece, and you had a great piece we spoke about last year with regards to Nashville. Are you still doing Urban File, by the way?
Yeah, well, I still have I changed the domain name on the site. So I'm just now having it under my personal name. It's aaronrenn.com.
That's great.
But I still put all of my work there that's there. All the writing that I do for City Journal and other outlets is on that site. And, Nashville is doing great. And that's an example. I try to get to Nashville once a year if I can, and then I can see how things are changing. So that as every time I do something on the city, I learn it better. Because of course things change all the time. You can't just rely on the knowledge you had 10 years ago about a place because things are so different. It's really booming there in Nashville. It's unbelievable, and that's what we see. We see 94 cities in America shrinking, and then you've got places like Nashville or Charlotte or Raleigh or Austin that are just absolutely booming. And even places you wouldn't think of that are booming, you might even think of them as flyover country places like Boise, Idaho. Idaho,
it's hot now,
Idaho
right?
last fall, and somebody out there said Idaho is the new Colorado in terms of the destination for these like San Francisco and Seattle people getting priced out. So Boise was the 8th fastest growing city in the whole country. Coeur d'Alene was the 11th fastest growing. Idaho Falls was 20th fastest growing. So they have some of the fastest growing cities in the country are in Idaho, believe it or not.
Idaho, I think another thing, there's a cable show that kind of made that a little popular too. It's called The Boys of Boise. It's like these guys that rehab houses or something, but it's a college. They have a college there too, Aaron. College City, and the prices are up. You know, they're not as cheap as they were 2 years ago. It's people found it.
Well, that happens everywhere. You know, when people start moving in, you know, it drives the prices up. And but you know, there is that's you know, you have to be able to expand your housing stock. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're building new houses, you will eventually normalize the prices. What causes the problems is when, you know, the regulators go crazy and they won't let you build anything, and then you end up with something like California,
right,
where the prices just go, you know, extremely high through the roof. A little bit of a short-term spike in prices can be good because it shows people want to be there. It's certainly a lot better than falling prices, as long as the market can respond to increased demand by increasing the supply. Then the market's functioning. It's where any demand goes up, and then the government won't let you respond to the supply, or respond with new supply that causes these highly expensive markets that don't seem to ever correct.
Are you planning a trip in the near future to Idaho to look at it?
No, I was out there last fall,
mm-hmm.
So I'm not planning one right now. But you know, I think it's an interesting place to keep an eye on.
Very cold, right, Aaron?
Well, you know, when I was there, it was cold, but it was it was very dry.
Really?
And I would say it was crisp. And I think it's really interesting. People say, and it's true, the number one predictor of population growth over the last several decades is the average January temperature. Oh. So the sun counts for a lot. But we see of people moving to Idaho that, you know, you don't necessarily have to have phenomenal weather to attract people. You know, I think there's a lot of we like to make excuses for why we our city or you know, we can't perform. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to get out of the excuse model sometimes and think about how to compete in the marketplace. If you're a place that is going to be able to, you know, do better in this knowledge-based, service-based economy, I think we do need to be realistic that some places have a lot of challenges they have to work through. But I think some of these Frost Belt cities can be competitive. They don't have to be.
I like that word.
I
like that word, Frost Belt. You're coming down to the last minute, Aaron. Thank you again. Hey, by the way, thanks so much for, you know, getting back to me right away last night. It was a little confusion on the email. But, you know, I always like to have you on. Anytime I'm on hosting, I always enjoy reading your stuff. But I like having you on the show. You're a great guest and very informative information. And you have a happy holiday.
Well, thank you. I love being on.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a great weekend.